Sprays seem like the perfect way to reapply sunscreen without messing up your makeup. But how effective are they? I did some experiments to find out. I'm Michelle, I'm a chemistry PhD cosmetic chemist and Australian. I take sunscreen seriously. A while ago I looked at sunscreen sticks in this video. Unfortunately, they gave a lot less protection than I expected. The most common question I got was, can I also look at sunscreen sprays? How much protection are we actually getting? Sprays are a lot harder than sticks. A bit of background, the amount of product on your skin is the most important thing when it comes to how much sun protection you get. The SPF on the label comes from the ISO 24444 test, or the FDA test, which is very similar. A certified lab measures the protection after a set amount of product is applied to skin evenly, and that amount is 2 milligrams per square centimeter. That means if I get 0.76 grams, which is this much, sunscreen onto my face perfectly evenly, basically replicating what's happening in this SPF test, I should get the SPF on the label. If I apply less, I would get less protection, and on average, studies have found that the relationship is roughly linear. If I apply half of the amount, I would get about half of the labeled SPF. This means that working out how much protection you're actually getting is mostly about checking how much product you've got on your face. Now, to work this out with different products, sticks are at the very easy end of the scale. You literally touch the sunscreen stick to your face, so thanks to the law of conservation of mass, you just have to weigh the stick before and after. The missing weight went on your face. Science. Normal sunscreens are a little bit harder. Not all of that weight ends up on your face, it's also on your fingers or whatever else you applied with, so it is still a good idea to squeeze out a little bit extra. But sprays. It has been a long couple of months of experiments. See, in the official test, they don't apply products like you normally would. For most products, they squeeze out little droplets from a syringe and then spread it out. This is to make the test fair between different products, to make sure that testing staff in different labs will run this test in pretty much the same way. For lotions and sticks, this isn't that much different from how you would normally apply it, but for sprays, in real life, the product that leaves the spray bottle doesn't all end up on your skin, unlike with this $p syringe testing situation. It goes freaking everywhere. So the first thing I wanted to find out, where does the spray actually go? I moved a whole bunch of furniture out of the way, stuck up some paper, and got my beautiful assistant, my husband Omar, to spray the sunscreen at his face. A quick disclaimer before we keep going, this video does show a lot of products being used in ways that they are not meant to be used. I have a chemistry PhD, I've been trained to handle very dangerous chemicals. Do not try these experiments yourself without consulting someone who can help you with a proper risk assessment and appropriate safety precautions. Follow the instructions on the label. Do you know how much of a sunscreen spray you're meant to apply?
No idea.
Spray this on your face until you think you've applied enough. Spray it as naturally as you can. Try not to inhale it.
How close am I supposed to go? I've never used one of these, so anyways, whatever.
You probably want to move it around, move it as you spray it on your face. Then we looked through a UV camera. These can't tell you how much protection you're getting, but you can see where the sunscreen went. A whole bunch went on his face, of course. The stuff that didn't mostly seemed to be on the bib, on the side of his spraying arm. Some also hit the wall. But surprisingly, there wasn't that much on his left side, I didn't see any on the wall, and there wasn't much on the ground. So originally my plan was to rig up one of these toilet seat things to catch the spray that didn't go on his face. That way he can feel what's going on in his face and use that as feedback, plus he can see where he's actually aiming the spray, and it's also just hilarious. Yeah, so you didn't feel too shitty or pissy with it on?
With this?
Yeah.
Or with the sunscreen?
With the toilet seat. Ruining the science! Don't antagonize your test subjects. But with this initial test, the weight just didn't change enough after 20 sprays for it to register on my scales. These scales are from eBay, I've calibrated them with a pretty accurate syringe, but I still want a pretty big change in mass to minimize any errors. Plus, the paper was really floppy and I can't really make a sheet of paper big enough to catch all the spray dropping down without it really getting in the way of actually spraying. So instead, I'm going to try catching the spray that actually ends up on the face with essentially a sheet mask. This is so annoying. Like, I knew that sprays were more complicated, so I expected more issues, but this is so much more than I expected. I think I have changed my plan like 5 times now. With the sunscreen sticks, I came up with that and ran it in like 3 hours. This has taken me more than a week so far. Omar was kind of getting the shits with my experiments, plus he wasn't really spraying the spray like a normal person. So I decided to do the rest of the experiments on myself, but before we could do that, we had to sort out another layer of complicatedness with sprays. Even if all of the product landed on the mask, the weight on the mask isn't going to be the same as the weight that landed on the mask a minute ago or the weight that came out of the spray. That's because sunscreen sprays have volatile and non-volatile components. The non-volatile components land on your skin or on paper and they stay there. This is stuff like the active sunscreen ingredients. But most of the spray is actually volatile. This is stuff like water and alcohol. It evaporates. They float off as the spray flies through the air. They also float off as the spray dries on your mask/skin. So what I'm going to do, and what I really should have done before I started torturing Omar, is I'm going to run some experiments to see what extra weight I should get if 100% of the spray lands on the mask. Then I can spray it normally and see what fraction actually landed on my face compared to on the floor or whatever. For example, say I spray out 10 grams of product all onto a sheet of paper and it weighs an extra 2 grams after it's dried. If I do the mask experiment with 10 grams and the mask only weighs an extra 1 gram, I know that only half of the spray actually landed on my face. I made a bunch of paper funnels for this to trap as much of the spray as I could. I tested 5 face sprays to see which one would be the best for my mask experiment. I also tested a body sunscreen spray for fun. I sprayed about 5 grams of each one into separate funnels over my stove with the fan on and the windows open to not gas myself. I weighed each bottle before and after spraying to see exactly how much came out, and I weighed the funnels before spraying and then 24 hours after spraying. That is the nice summarized version, but in reality, there were tons of problems. Of course, because sprays are just problems. First off, the spray didn't all go into the funnel. You can see some of the mist floating off. But I think the amount is small enough that it shouldn't make too much of a difference. And while I managed to hang the funnels to dry without them smearing on anything, which was honestly quite amazing, some of them were really wet and they started dripping onto the ground, so I had to redo those ones. I did some number crunching and there are some interesting points here. Overall, with face sunscreens, it seems like the percentage that stays on the paper/your skin is pretty similar, about 25 to 30%. Spray E is the lowest, which makes sense. It's only SPF 30 and it's really sold as a makeup setting spray. It does feel really nice and light on my skin. The other SPF 30 is mostly meant to be a moisturizer, so it makes sense that there are more non-volatiles that stay on your skin and moisturize. I also looked at how much comes out per pump of the spray. I also measured an extra face spray that I found and another bottle of spray A with the same formula but in a slightly different spray bottle. The numbers are just kind of all over the place. The one that put out the most spray put out about 3.5 times more per pump than the lowest. It even sprayed out more than the body spray, which I was pretty surprised by. I was going to get this started during the funnel test, but I ended up doing it later with 10 nice solid sprays because first off, the sprays didn't really come out consistently. Sometimes there would be like really big drips, sometimes there would be some air in the tube, so these numbers are really like a best case scenario. The second reason is that I am just really bad at counting. I lose count after 10 all the time. It is just part of who I am as a person. So I'm going to do the mask test with these 2 products, and I'm also going to do the funnel test again for those a few more times just to make sure I didn't massively mess it up. On to test number 4, the mask test. This is to see how much spray actually lands on my face. I cut out a bunch of creepy face masks with little eye holes so I could see where the spray was actually pointing. I clipped them to my hair. I sprayed about 4.5 grams onto my face for each mask, makeup setting spray style, in an X and a T to make basically an asterisk. I naturally hold the spray about 20 centimeters from my face, which is what the instructions usually say. That is 8 inches for you imperial heathens, and I did 3 trials per product. This whole process was just really unpleasant. I did this with the window wide open, there was good ventilation but no breeze, and While I was using a lot more sunscreen than anyone would realistically use, the mask does block the spray from going straight up my nose. But the fragrance overload was really not nice. There was also a whole bunch of sunscreen all over my stuff, and the clips pulled on my hair, which really hurt. Science is pain. Then the next day, I weighed the masks and did the calculations. I'm really surprised by how little spray landed on the mask. For spray A, it was 15 to 18%, and spray B was even worse, 11 to 14%. So with my spraying technique, which I think is how a lot of people are using spray sunscreens, I would need to spray 5 to 9 times more sunscreen out of the bottle than I would actually get on my face. This translates to 48 to 76 sprays of sunscreen for a full 0.76 gram application amount for my face size. If you're aiming for a quarter teaspoon, which is what's recommended if you don't know your face size, that would be 80 to 120 sprays. I am honestly pretty shocked. I thought maybe 1/3 to a half would land on my face, so like 33 to 50%. In the past, I have recommended sprays before for reapplication, but this is really eye-opening. It is just not looking great for sprays. I thought that would be my last experiment. It would give me some really good answers, but I realized I wasn't entirely happy with this. I just needed to know more. Why were the numbers so low, and is there a way to spray it better? During the experiment, I noticed a couple of things. While I was spraying, I could feel lots of mist landing everywhere on my arms, my neck, and my chest, but a lot of it seemed to land on my scalp, and some of that even dripped into my eyes. With the UV camera, you can see that there's a lot of coverage near the hairline, near the top of that paper mask. I also realized that when I was spraying, I did a lot of downward strokes, and going up just felt kind of weird. To me, this suggested that maybe a lot of that spray was coming out at the start when you've just started pressing down the pump. So this could mean that, unbeknownst to me before this, but very clear now that I am watching it back, a lot of the spray is coming out when I'm aiming above my face/the mask. I checked this by spraying different sunscreens at paper from 20 centimeters away. Even when I was moving the spray down in a downward stroke, it really looks like the sunscreen is concentrated at the start of the spray. It's making more of an oval blob rather than a proper line. I also looked at the sprays in slow motion. You can see that the densest stuff comes out of the spray near the start when you're first pressing the pump down about the first 10%. I think my technique is what people are doing in practice and probably better than average. I have watched so many people applying spray sunscreen on social media over the last few weeks. People are doing giant zigzags and giant circles, at least with the asterisks. I am mostly crossing over the middle of my face. But maybe if you start with a spray aimed within your face borders, then you would get more of it onto your face. Oh, that feels really wrong though. It's very confronting just like looking straight at it like this. And obviously if you are doing this in real life, that is like the worst place to aim to avoid inhaling the sunscreen, but I do really want to know how much that improves things. By this point, I was really sick of getting sunscreen all over myself, but I just couldn't stop. I really needed to know if a different spraying technique would make a difference. So I made a dummy head. Meet Plastic Michelle. She's roughly the same size as my head. I added some ear loops and a head loop to clip the mask onto. According to some more tests I did on paper, the spray pattern, like the blast radius I guess, is about 4 centimeters when you're spraying from 20 centimeters away. So that meant I needed to aim within here to keep the spray mostly inside the mask. I also decided to spray it outside because I was just so sick of the fragrances. They are actually pretty nice fragrances, but not all of them together, and not when that's all you've been smelling for the last month. Plus, with this setup, I could make sure that the spray was pointing right at the mask. I'm definitely not going to have that spraying past my face problem. I used a ruler to make sure I was consistently spraying from 20 centimeters away. So this very much represents the best case scenario. But as I was doing this, I noticed another brand new problem. This was not a windy day, but even with the slightest breeze, a whole bunch of the spray just went sideways. I rigged up this paper and string so you can see how little breeze there is. You can also see that the leaves on the tree were barely moving. The string moves more when I gently flap this notebook at it. But in all of the footage, you can still see a whole bunch of the mist just going past the mask, drifting sideways. And this made sense after I thought about it. These mist particles are way lighter than leaves or string or paper. Even my arm moving seems to be pulling some of the spray away. That would have also been happening with my earlier face spray test, but probably more because my arm would have been closer to the mist. So I tried not to spray when there was literally any wind. I did 2 runs per spray, and I wiped down Plastic Michelle's face with alcohol in between. I weighed the masks after 24 hours and did some calculations, and it is better. On average, we have 35% or about 1/3 of the spray landing on the mask. That is about 2.5 times more than when I was spraying it on myself. There is a pretty big difference between the two runs for spray B, and I went back and quadruple checked if I mixed up the masks. I did not. I was pretty confused until I remembered I did these in a randomized order, which was this. So it could be that it got windier as I was running these tests, or maybe I tried harder at the start, or maybe both. But this was always going to be really variable. In real life, people don't spray as well as I was spraying, and wind exists. Okay, I was meant to be done at this point, but the wind bit really bothered me. I got 1.5 times more spray on the mask in that first product B test. I didn't have this big of a difference when I was doing it on myself, and I could barely see what I was doing, so I couldn't fairly say that this was actually the best case scenario. So literally at midnight, because this was just eating away at me, I needed to know. I did one final, I swear this is the last one, final, for real this time, experiment. The same test, but indoors with good ventilation and no breeze. I didn't even move the spray, just straight squirts at the mask. I do this so the rest of you don't have to. Like and subscribe for really intense over-analysis. So now we have the actual best case scenario numbers, spraying directly at the face from 25 centimeters away, staying well within the borders, indoors, no wind, no arm movement causing wind. The numbers are better, but not by that much. We are still losing about half of the spray, but this is as good as it gets. So to me, this is what the results are saying. Let me know if you agree or disagree. There is a fundamental limitation with these sorts of sprays. And I think the answer is in this mist that's just been haunting me for all of these experiments. Every time I've seen someone spraying, there is a whole bunch of clouds just flying everywhere, even when they're indoors. I think it's just a physics conundrum. These products are designed to put out really small drops in a fine mist so that when they land on your face, they won't mess up your makeup, you aren't getting like giant drips. But if the drops are too small, then several things can happen, and remember these drops are getting smaller as they're flying through the air. Number one, they stop and they drop down before even getting to your face. You can see this happening in these slow motion videos. Sprays don't put out a single droplet size, they put out a range, so you can see that some of the smaller particles are dropping short of 20 centimeters. Number two, if the droplets are even smaller, even lighter, then they get pushed around really easily by even the smallest air currents. Like if you're moving your arm as you're spraying downwards or in a giant zigzag or in circles, that's all the mist that you see flying around in videos. And of course, if it's affected by air currents, it's also going to be easier to breathe in. Number three, they might end up even smaller and turn airborne. They're just too small to see. You can see that some of the mist particles are just disappearing without dropping to the ground. So maybe if someone could engineer some sort of spray that had really uniform particles that were just big enough to get to your face without dripping, then you would lose a lot less product. But there is another problem. These last two mask experiments were the best case scenario, but only for getting the most product on your face. The problem is the way that I was spraying sacrificed the other big factor that is also important for protection, which is how even the layer is. The sunscreen is really concentrated in the middle of the face, which is exactly what I was aiming for and why we caught so much more product on the mask. But sprays are spotty, so there is just not enough overlap of the spots near the edges to give continuous coverage. It gets really uneven and sparse. If I tried to even it out by spraying closer to the edges, then more sunscreen would be missing the face, so the amount would be lower. You could rub it in afterwards, which I think is the best approach, and a lot of guidelines do recommend this. You can even spray it into your hands and just apply it like a regular lotion or cream sunscreen. But the problem is the main benefit of using these sprays, which everyone is mentioning the most, it's easy reapplication without messing up your makeup or getting your hands dirty. So even though in these best case scenario tests, it looks like you're getting a half to a third of the spray on your face, so half to a third of the label protection, which doesn't sound so bad, you're not actually getting that much protection because the spray is just so uneven. That means you're not getting the SPF on the label. Even if you spray 14 to 25 sprays for my face size, you're not getting a quarter teaspoon's worth of protection even if you spray 23 to 42 sprays. That is so many sprays. I don't think most people are even doing 10 sprays. Now, I only tested pump sprays, but what about aerosol sprays? These are the ones that you hold down and they keep spraying, you don't need to keep pumping, and that's because the spray gets pushed out by a gas. Most of these have a propellant like butane mixed with the sunscreen inside the can. These have a few upsides compared to pumps. First off, the spray that comes out is a bit more consistent and the droplets get pushed out a bit harder by the propellant, and that means that they can travel further. Plus it's less effort, you can just hold down the nozzle, but there are probably more downsides. First off, the propellant counts as part of the whatever grams is on the label, but for testing, these sunscreens get tested at 2 milligrams per square centimeter. after they get rid of the propellant. I know, this blew my mind completely when I found out, but it does make sense. The propellant is liquid inside the can, but once it comes out, it's a gas, so you can't weigh it accurately. So at least this way with the SPF test, all the aerosol sunscreens are being measured fairly against each other. But that does mean that you're getting less protection in a 100-gram can of SPF 50 aerosol spray than a 100-gram bottle of SPF 50 lotion or a pump spray. One Australian scientist, Dr. Elke Hacker, released the propellant from a bunch of different aerosol sunscreen sprays. She found that 27 to over 61% of these products was propellant. That means that with a sunscreen can this big, you're only getting about 3 adult full body applications. Yes, this is a dry shampoo. I didn't have any aerosol sunscreens. If you're wondering, you do also get less protection with aerosol mousses or foam sunscreens, but those usually only have 5 to 10% propellant. Plus, you can actually get all of the other 90 to 95% onto your skin. Because the other big problem with aerosol sprays, their droplets are usually even smaller than pump sprays, and that means that they are even more easily messed up by wind. The same Australian scientists also tested this by spraying aerosol sunscreens across a 12.5 centimetre gap, which is a bit less than 5 inches for you heathens, into an 18 centimetre funnel, and then she checked what happened with different levels of wind blowing sideways through that gap. With 10 km per hour wind, which is when you can hear the leaves rustling and you can feel the wind on your face, an average of about 50% more is lost, and this explains what happened with my outdoor experiment. With 20 km per hour wind, which is when loose paper starts flying around, there's an average of about 70% more getting lost. The problem is, on average, at popular Australian beaches and probably beaches all around the world, there's over 10 km per hour wind 90% of the time. The rest of the time, there are still lots of random gusts that are going to be well over 10 km per hour. And this is without even considering all of those other issues that showed up in my experiments, like the spray just going past your skin. The funnel used in these experiments is 18 centimeters wide. It's as wide as my book, The Science of Beauty, available now. So her setup was the same kind of vibe as spraying the sunscreen right in the middle of the paper mask, the best case scenario. Her setup catches all of the stuff at the edges that would have gone past your arm, and then the wind gets rid of another 28 to 93% on top of that. And I haven't even gone properly into safety yet. Smaller spray particles are easier to inhale, and that's why you see a lot of products say things like, don't spray this directly at your face, spray it onto your hands, and then apply it to your face. The safety concern is that these very small particles can get inhaled deep into your lungs past the bits with the hairs that move things out, and so they end up stuck there. That can lead to lots of respiratory issues, and there's also possible irritation of your airways. So because of all these issues of effectiveness that were raised by Dr. Hacker's testing, plus all of these potential safety concerns, Australian sunscreen standards are being updated, and it should be live by the time this video comes out in July 2024. Aerosol and spray pumps all need to have these instructions on the label, and there are similar rules proposed for the US as well. So after all of this, what have we learned? First off, SPF face sprays aren't that effective for reapplying sunscreen to your face. Even if you don't care about inhalation and safety, you need to spray so much more of this than you think. Based on how I've seen the average person applying these, only about 1/5 to less than 1/15 of the product will actually end up on your face. That means you're wasting at least 80% of the product, most likely way more. You need to apply at least 5 times more, probably much more than that. Even if you only spray them right at the middle of your face, which I need to remind you is the least safe bit of you to spray, plus you're literally only getting good coverage right here, you are still losing half to 2/3 of the product. If there's even the slightest breeze, you'll probably need to double that amount. Wind is just extra bad for sprays, stay away from wind. Now, I do think sprays are useful in some situations, and I'm probably missing some. Let me know what you think in the comments. Sprays can be a good way to apply body sunscreen really quickly, and they are a lot easier to spread, so this might be handy if you have really impatient kids. For areas with body hair, sunscreen sprays are usually clear and they don't need to be rubbed in as much. If you have like a beard, then spraying it into your hands and then applying it is a really good way to avoid that whiteness from regular sunscreens. Sprays are also probably the best kind of product to get sunscreen onto your scalp. They're probably way more effective than powders, which are my least favorite type of sunscreen. For reapplying over makeup, I would recommend patting on a regular sunscreen with a sponge. You could also pat on a sunscreen spray that you've sprayed onto your hand, or using a sunscreen stick. I have a video on my tests on those, and you do need to apply more of those than you think as well. If you're getting a ton of sun, I would just give up on trying to save the makeup. To get a really solid reapplication, you should just reapply your regular sunscreen normally and then redo the makeup on top. And of course, you should layer sunscreen with other types of sun protection, use shade, stay out of the sun during peak UV, wear hats and protective clothing and sunglasses. If you have more sunscreen questions, how to apply sunscreen, how to choose sunscreen, if sunscreen is bad for you, the answers are probably in my giant sunscreen guide, which is next to my head. If you want more nerdy deep dives into skincare science, check out this playlist.